My name is Eleanor Marks. I'm 67 years old. The kettle was just beginning to hum when the phone rang a sharp, impatient sound that sliced through the quiet of my morning. Sunlight was spreading across the kitchen counter, warm and golden, on the cracked ceramic mug I'd had since my first year teaching. I let it ring twice before I answered. Mom Page's voice burst through brisk and rushed like she was already late for something. Listen, I'm flying out Friday. I need you to watch the kids for 2 weeks. I blinked at the steam rising from the kettle. 2 weeks? You're retired, she said, exasperated. You don't do anything anymore. For a moment, the words didn't land. They hovered in the air like a faint echo, unreal and heavy at once. I had heard many things from my daughter over the years. Impatience, sarcasm, that tone she used when she spoke to people she considered slow. But this one cut differently. I don't do anything anymore, I repeated softly. Exactly, she said, missing the weight in my voice. So, it's perfect. They won't be a bother. Ruby's got her tablet, Finn plays on his Switch, and Ollie sleeps half the day anyway. You just have to keep them alive. I stared out the kitchen window at the maple tree I'd planted the year she graduated college. Its leaves had started to turn small flames of red at the edges. I might have plans, I said quietly. A small, incredulous laugh came through the line. Plans, Mom, come on. What plans could you possibly have? Her confidence in my emptiness was staggering. She went on about a wellness conference in Miami, about opportunity and networking, and how her husband's schedule was impossible. I stopped listening after, "You don't do anything." I used to tell my students that words can bruise if they hit soft places. Paige had found mine without even trying. When she paused for breath, I said, "All right, bring them Friday morning." There was surprise, maybe even relief in her sigh. "Thank you. I knew you'd understand. I'll text their routines." "Of course," I said, and hung up before she could say goodbye. The kitchen seemed smaller afterward, the silence too neat. I poured the boiling water over the tea bag and watched it darken one thin swirl at a time. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. The same smell Paige once said made her feel like she was suffocating in nostalgia. I took my mug to the window seat, sat down carefully, my knees had started to complain this year, and let the heat seep into my hands. I thought of all the years that had brought me here. 38 years as a school librarian. Hundreds of children's faces, the smell of crayons and glue sticks. The quiet joy of teaching someone how to read their first real book. I had done something. I had done a lifetime of somethings. And now, apparently, I did nothing. The phone buzzed again on the counter. A text this time. Page 7 a.m. Drop off. Please, no sugar, no TV. Also, Ollie doesn't like the sound of your old clock. Maybe cover it. I set the mug down. The maple outside shimmered its colors, catching the light like fire. Maybe Paige was right about one thing: I didn't have a job anymore. But I had time she'd mistaken for emptiness. Time she'd handed to me without realizing what I could do with it. I reached for my planner on the shelf, the one still filled with neat handwriting from the years before retirement. The pages were blank after May. I flipped to Friday and wrote in tidy cursive, 7:00 a.m. Paige's kids arrive. Then below it, lesson begins. The kettle clicked again as it cooled, and the house went still, waiting. The next morning, the house felt like a museum of things too well kept. The air carried the faint smell of cedar polish and lavender detergent, a mixture that had lingered since before my husband passed. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, tracing gentle lines across the hardwood floor as I moved from room to room. Every corner of this bungalow in Asheville held something of the past. The small bookshelf built from reclaimed wood, the framed photographs fading at the edges, the stack of handwritten letters in the drawer of my writing desk. Most of them were from the years when Paige was still in college, back when she wrote to me about everything. I paused by the mantel. There was a photo from the summer of '96, Paige at 8 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a paper kite she and her father had made together. Henry's arm was around her, his smile easy, his face open to the world. He had that kind of warmth that filled a space without trying. When he died, the house didn't just lose his laughter. It lost its pulse. For a long time after, I filled that silence with work. The library became my refuge. The children there, my students needed structure stories, someone to listen. I gave them all of it. And every evening I came home to a quiet that grew familiar enough to stop hurting. Then Paige started climbing new jobs, new cities, a new last name. I was proud of her, even when she forgot to call. That's what mothers do, I told myself. We make room for their lives until there's no space left for ours. I walked into the guest room soon to be the children's room. The bedspread was freshly washed, folded smooth at the edges. I placed 3 small baskets at the foot of the bed, one for each child. The smallest gesture of welcome I could still give. Her words from yesterday returned sharp and clear. You don't do anything anymore. I'd thought about them through the night, replaying them while the clock ticked above the mantel. It wasn't just what she said, it was the certainty in her tone, the way she believed it. Somewhere along the way, I had let her believe that. I had made myself too quiet, too easy to overlook. I opened the old cabinet beside the window. Inside were lesson binders, the kind I used to prepare for the library reading hour. I ran a finger down one spine, labeled Summer Reading, 2014. The handwriting was still steady back then. I smiled faintly. It struck me that I still knew how to teach. That patience, that steadiness, it hadn't disappeared when I left the library. It had just been waiting. I set the binder on the desk and began pulling out blank paper, a pen, a small stack of index cards. My hands moved with old rhythm. By the time the kettle clicked off, the page already had a title. Week 1 Plan. Outside, the maple tree shimmered in the wind. Its leaves, half green and half red, looked like they were in the middle of changing their minds. Maybe I was too. Friday arrived cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning that made the air taste sharp. I woke before dawn, too alert to stay in bed. The house was spotless. The sheets turned down breakfast, prepared a plate of banana muffins cooling on the counter. Every room waited. By 7, I heard tires on gravel. Paige's SUV pulled up, headlights still on. I watched through the window as she stepped out. Immaculate as always, hair smooth, blazer-pressed phone already in hand. She waved briefly before opening the back door. Come on, guys. We're late. 3 shapes tumbled out. Ruby, first 11, and long-limbed earbuds in hoodie zipped tight. Finn followed, dragging a backpack that looked heavier than he did. Little Ollie came last, clutching a plastic dinosaur, his cheeks still puffed from sleep. Paige was talking even as she moved, tossing instructions like confetti. No sugar, no TV after 9. They each have tablets. Screen time is educational only. Ruby's allergic to peanuts. Finn's doing a no-dairy trial. And Ollie, well, good luck. She gave a short laugh that wasn't really humor. Oh, and bedtime's strictly 8:30. I nodded, trying to keep up. Got it. She handed me a folded paper labeled Daily Structure in bold font with color-coded columns. There were lines for vitamins, hydration goals, and something called Mindful Minutes. I wanted to smile but didn't. Ruby brushed past me without a glance. Finn muttered a hi, and Ollie hid behind his backpack. They all carried screens, small, glowing rectangles lighting their faces. Paige crouched to adjust Ruby's collar, but didn't look her in the eye. Behave for Grandma. I'll FaceTime when I can. When you can. Ruby echoed softly, but Paige didn't notice. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and stood up. That's my rideshare to the airport. I've got to go. She kissed the air near Finn's hair, patted Ollie's shoulder, then turned to me. Thanks again, Mom. "You're saving me." I wanted to tell her that this wasn't saving. It was repairing. But she was already moving toward the car. The trunk slammed a sharp sound that seemed to echo through the quiet yard. I stood on the porch, watching as she reversed too fast, the gravel spitting under the tires. For a moment, Ruby looked back through the rear window. Her eyes met mine, uncertain searching, and then the car turned onto the road, swallowed by the trees. Inside, the house felt smaller, with so many bodies, and yet somehow emptier. The kids clustered in the living room like strangers in a waiting room, each lost behind a screen. "Breakfast's on the table," I said gently. No one moved. I poured orange juice into 3 glasses and set them down. "You can eat whenever you're ready." Finn shrugged, eyes on his game. Ruby didn't remove her earbuds. Ollie stared at me wide-eyed, then whispered, "Can I have the blue cup?" I smiled. "Of course you can." That was the first time someone looked at me that morning. We sat together at the table, me and Ollie at least. He picked at his muffin, fascinated by the crumbs. I noticed a faint bruise on his wrist, the kind that comes from a playground fall or a too tight grip. I didn't ask. Ruby eventually wandered in, scrolling on her phone. She ate, standing up 1 bite at a time, then disappeared again. Finn followed, muttering that he missed the Wi-Fi speed at home. By mid-morning, they'd claimed the sofa, the charger cords, the silence. The house that once held stories now hummed with digital noise. I went to the kitchen, opened the notebook from yesterday, and wrote, "Day 1 observe. Don't interfere yet. Let them show you what they need." Outside, the maple tree flickered in the breeze, its branches scattering light across the porch. The house was no longer quiet, but it wasn't alive yet either. I rinsed the plates, set them neatly to dry, and listened to the faint sounds of game music and giggles behind the door. It would take time. Children needed more than schedules and tablets. They needed eyes that actually saw them, hands that reached without scolding, a rhythm steadier than any chart could plan. The first lesson had begun, even if they didn't know it yet. By Saturday morning, I knew the screens had to go, at least for a while. The living room looked like a charging station, cords, tangled devices, blinking children half awake and fully absent. I poured coffee, took a slow sip, and decided it was time to begin. "All right," I said, setting my mug down. "New plan. We'll have meals together, no phones at the table, and everyone helps out. After breakfast, we'll take a walk to the park." 3 pairs of eyes blinked at me as if I'd announced martial law. Ruby tugged out 1 earbud. "A walk? It's cold." Finn groaned. "I don't even walk at home." "Mom says it's boring." Ollie whispered, "Can I bring my dinosaur?" "You can," I said. "He probably needs the fresh air too." That earned me a faint smile from Ollie, but the other 2 just slumped deeper into their chairs. I brought out scrambled eggs and toast, placing the plate in the center like an offering. "Serve yourselves," I said. Finn reached for the juice, poured too fast, and half the glass spilled across the table. The orange puddle crept toward Ruby's phone. "Seriously," she snapped, yanking it away. "You're so clumsy." Finn's shoulders tensed. "You're mean." I handed him a towel. "Clean it up, please." He froze, waiting for me to scold or sigh. When I didn't, he slowly wiped the table, eyes darting toward mine. I gave a small nod, nothing more. The kitchen settled into the quiet rhythm of chewing and glassware. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it was a start. After breakfast, I gathered the dishes. Ruby stood clearly ready to vanish back into her screen. "Ruby," I said, keeping my voice gentle, "could you help dry these?" She looked stunned. "Mom never makes us do this." "I'm not your mom," I said evenly, "but I'd like you to try." For a moment, I thought she'd refuse. Then, with a muttered whatever, she took the towel. She worked in stiff silence, the plate slipping slightly in her hands. I steadied it with mine. The contact startled her. She looked up, eyes unsure. When the kitchen was done, we set out for the park. Finn kicked every rock on the sidewalk, Ruby dragged her feet, and Ollie hummed to his dinosaur. The wind nipped at our faces, and the sun hung low above the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the rooftops gold. At the playground, Ollie climbed the slide, fearless and grinning. Finn followed, pretending not to smile. Ruby sat on a bench, scrolling through her phone, until the signal dropped. She sighed, dramatic, exasperated, and finally looked around. Children were running, laughing, falling into grass. The sound of it seemed to chip away at her distance. I sat beside her, not saying a word. After a while, she spoke first. "You used to bring Mom here, didn't you?" "Yes," I said softly. "Every Saturday. She liked the swings." Ruby didn't respond, but her fingers stopped moving. The phone went dark in her lap. Back home, the resistance returned. Door slams whispered complaints, but the edge was duller now. When bedtime came, they filed down the hall without argument. As I tucked Finn's blanket, he mumbled, "Half asleep. Mom never makes us do this." I brushed his hair from his forehead. "I know," I whispered. "That's why I am." He didn't answer, but his breathing slowed, steady and soft against the quiet house. The house was finally still. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, the one Paige wanted me to cover because its sound made the house feel ancient. I'd left it uncovered on purpose. The rhythm comforted me. It reminded me that time kept moving even when people didn't. I had just turned off the bedside lamp when I heard a muffled sound, soft, shaky breaths carried through the thin walls. For a moment, I thought one of the boys was talking in his sleep. Then I recognized the quiet sob of someone trying not to be heard. I slipped on my robe and walked down the hall. The door to the guest room was slightly open. The nightlight glowed faintly, washing the room in a pale yellow haze. Ruby sat up in bed, her knees pulled to her chest, shoulders trembling. I knocked gently. "Can I come in?" She startled, wiping at her eyes. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice small and tight. "I know," I said, easing into the room. "But maybe I'll sit for a bit anyway." I settled on the edge of the bed. The blanket was tangled around her feet, her pillow damp. She looked at me sideways, embarrassed, as if crying were a kind of failure. "Nightmares?" I asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded. "I keep dreaming Mom drives away and forgets to come back." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Sometimes I'm yelling for her, but she doesn't hear me." I felt something old and familiar stir a quiet ache I hadn't felt since Paige was small. "That sounds scary," I said. Ruby sniffled. "She's not bad, you know. She just doesn't see things. She's busy all the time." I know I said again because I did. I'd spent decades watching my daughter chase everything except stillness. Ruby rubbed her eyes. "At home, it's like she's there, but not really. When she leaves, it feels the same." The sentence landed heavy between us. I wanted to defend Paige, to say that mothers can love and still be lost. But Ruby didn't need excuses. She needed truth she could hold. "When your mom was your age," I began, "she used to make me read to her every night. Same book over and over, Charlotte's Web. She'd fall asleep before the end, and I'd keep reading anyway, just so she'd wake to the sound of a happy ending." Ruby's face softened. "Did she like the story?" "She loved it," I said. But what she loved most was being read to, having someone stay until she fell asleep. Ruby's lips quivered. "She doesn't do that with us. Finn reads to Ollie sometimes." I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's kind of wonderful, don't you think? The way you all look after each other." Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't hide. They slid down freely, small and shining. I stayed quiet, just held her hand, and let her cry until the tremors faded. When her breathing steadied, I said, "You can always come to me, Ruby, even if it's just a dream that feels too heavy." She nodded without speaking, already half asleep. I pulled the blanket up to her chin, careful not to wake her. Before leaving, I looked around the room. 3 small backpacks leaned against the dresser side by side like travelers waiting for morning. On the nightstand sat Ruby's tablet, the screen still faintly glowing with a paused cartoon. I turned it off, and the quiet settled back into place. In the hallway, the clock ticked on. The house felt lighter, as if one of its many closed doors had finally cracked open. I went back to bed and lay awake listening to that fragile rhythm of peace, the kind that only comes after someone has dared to cry. Sunday morning came with the smell of rain. A thin drizzle tapped against the kitchen window as I poured oatmeal into 3 bowls. The children drifted in one by one, sleepy, slow, softer than they'd been the day before. Ruby mumbled a good morning. Finn reached for the sugar without asking. Ollie hummed, dragging his toy dinosaur across the counter. For a few minutes, it felt like an ordinary family breakfast, the kind I hadn't had in years. Then Ruby's tablet buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up, frowned, and set it down again. The screen stayed lit long enough for me to glimpse an email subject line. Payment overdue account linked to Mark's residence. I blinked. Mark's residence. My name. I didn't say anything. Children notice tone before words, and I didn't want Ruby to hear suspicion in mine. But when they left the table to play, I opened the tablet. The inbox was still visible. 6 messages from banks and online stores, all addressed to Paige Marks Carver, using my street address. The oatmeal cooled as I scrolled through dates and numbers. Most were small, $45, $89, or $110, but together they painted a pattern. Purchases shipped to my home credit cards with minimum payments overdue. I set the tablet down and stared at the rain streaking the glass. The thought that Paige might have used my address for her bills wasn't unthinkable. She'd done it before, once or twice, back when she moved apartments too often. But that had been years ago, before the travel jobs and the designer clothes. Before she stopped calling to ask permission, the mail confirmed what the screen suggested. In the afternoon, I found 2 envelopes tucked into the pile on the counter, both marked Final Notice. Same sender, same address. My address. I tucked them into a drawer. Then I called Marion. She answered on the second ring, her voice as calm as ever. Eleanor, everything all right? More or less, I said. You still know a thing or two about credit reports. Marion laughed softly. Once a social worker, always a social worker. What's going on? I told her what I'd found, the emails, the letters, the familiar pattern of carelessness. There was a long pause on the other end. Sounds like she's using your address to open or maintain accounts, Marion said finally. It's not uncommon, especially when someone's juggling debt. You might want to start a file dates, screenshots, envelopes. It's not about accusing her. It's about protecting yourself. Protecting myself. The words felt foreign. I had spent a lifetime protecting Paige from bad grades, broken hearts, overdue rent, all the little storms she never learned to weather. But this was different. This was proof that she dragged my name into her mess quietly and without care. That night, after the children fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of paper and a small notebook. I copied down subject lines, reference numbers, anything that looked official. The pen scratched softly in the dark, a sound both steady and sad. Halfway through, I looked up at the window. My reflection stared back, a tired woman with kind eyes and a spine that had learned to bend without breaking. It wasn't anger I felt, not yet. Just a steady clarity, a realization that love sometimes needed record signatures and timestamps, not because it stopped being love, but because it finally started asking for respect. By the next Saturday, the house had begun to find a rhythm. Morning walks, shared meals, quiet hours for reading. It was fragile, but it was something. And like anything fragile, it didn't take much to crack. It started with rain again, the kind that makes children restless. The park was out of the question, the air heavy and gray. Ruby slouched on the couch, scrolling on her phone. Finn complained that the Wi-Fi was too slow. Ollie, restless and loud, kept running his toy truck across the hardwood floor. "Why don't we play something together?" I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Cards, maybe. Or a board game." Ruby didn't look up. "We don't do board games." "Then we can learn." Finn groaned. "Mom says games like that are a waste of time." I smiled faintly. "Your mom said that about a lot of things. She was wrong most of the time." That earned me a glare from Ruby. "Don't talk about her like that." The words came out sharper than she meant, but they stung all the same. I took a breath. "I'm not talking badly about her. I'm talking about what's true." Ruby shot to her feet. "You think you know everything just because you're old?" Finn laughed nervously, sensing trouble, and Ollie banged his truck against the table. "Enough," I said quietly. But the quiet didn't land. Ruby's voice rose. "Mom says you're controlling. That's why she doesn't visit. You make everyone feel small." The vase on the table, a simple one blue glass, a gift from Henry years ago, tipped as Ruby's sleeve caught it. It hit the floor with a sharp, clean sound and shattered into a dozen glittering pieces. For a moment, no one moved. The room froze in the silence that follows impact. Ruby stared at the shards. "It's just a stupid vase," she muttered, her voice trembling. "You probably have 100 more." Ollie started crying. Finn backed toward the hallway, guilt and fear flickering across his face. I knelt down slowly, feeling the ache in my knees, and picked up the first piece of glass. "Careful," I said softly. "It's sharp." Ruby's chin quivered. "Aren't you mad?" "Of course I am," I said. "But anger won't clean the floor." I handed her a small broom from the corner. "Help me." She hesitated, then dropped to her knees beside me. Finn appeared a moment later, wordless, holding the dustpan. Even Ollie stopped crying and fetched a rag from the kitchen. Together in silence, we swept and gathered every fragment, every splinter of blue. The floor gleamed again, but something else had shifted the air, the distance between us. Ruby whispered, "I didn't mean to break it. I know I said." Things break when too much gets held inside. Her hands stilled. "You sound like you're talking about me." "Maybe I am," I said. She blinked, hard eyes filling but refusing to spill. Finn fidgeted beside her, unsure what to say. Finally, he muttered, "I'm sorry too." I reached out, touched his shoulder. "For what?" He shrugged. "For laughing. For saying you're boring. You're not." A small laugh escaped me. "Well, that's progress." We stayed there a while, the three of us kneeling on the floor, surrounded by a faint shimmer of glass dust. Ollie sat in my lap, pressing his warm cheek against my arm. The storm outside had softened to a drizzle, tapping gently against the windows. When the last piece was gone, I carried the trash to the bin. The air smelled faintly of lemons and rain. Ruby lingered near the table, tracing the outline where the vase had stood. "You could glue it back," she said quietly. "I don't think so," I replied. "But maybe I'll plant something in the garden where it fell." She looked at me, not smiling exactly, but her eyes were different, less guarded, less certain of her anger. Finn yawned heavy with the weight of what had just passed. "Can we still play a game?" "Yes," I said. "Let's find one together." The rain outside eased to silence, leaving behind that rarest of sounds, a house beginning to breathe again. Marion showed up on Tuesday afternoon unannounced, but not unwelcome. She'd always had a knack for appearing at the right time, usually with something in her hands and concern in her eyes. Today, it was a basket of fresh peaches and a soft look that said, "You're not fooling me, Eleanor. You look better than last month," she said, setting the basket on the counter. "Though I can't say the same for your kitchen table." What happened there? I glanced at the small crack running along the edge of the table, a remnant of Saturday's storm. "A little family earthquake," I said. "Everyone survived." Marion chuckled, pouring herself coffee without asking. That's what matters. The question is what's happening underneath. The children were in the living room building a tower out of mismatched blocks. They were quieter these days, cautious. They watched me more closely now, not with fear, but with a kind of testing trust. When Finn laughed, it was still too loud, as if he didn't believe he was allowed to. Marion noticed. Her gaze drifted from me to the kids, then back again. "They're beautiful," she said softly. "But that's a lot of tension for 3 small bodies." "They've been through changes," I said, drying my hands on a towel. "Their mother, Paige, is traveling again. 2 weeks, right?" Marion stirred her coffee slowly. "And she hasn't checked in." I hesitated. "Just one message. Something about spotty Wi-Fi." Marion gave a short, dry laugh. "Spotty Wi-Fi is the modern version of I don't want to talk about it." She sat across from me, elbows on the table. "Eleanor, you need to protect yourself. I can see what this is doing to you." To them, I knew what she meant. The long pauses, the flinches, when I raised my voice even gently. Paige's absence wasn't just physical. It was a shape the children had learned to live around. "I've started keeping records," I said quietly. "Emails mail a few things that didn't feel right." Marion nodded approvingly. "Good. But don't stop there. You should talk to someone, a family therapist, not for you, for them. Someone neutral who can observe without judgment." "I don't want to embarrass Paige," I said quickly. "If this gets formal, she'll think I'm attacking her." Marion gave me a look. Only old friends can give the kind that cuts through every excuse. "And if you don't, what happens when this mess follows those children into adulthood?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. "Don't think of it as accusing her," she continued gently. "Think of it as documenting without drama. That's what I used to tell my clients. Quiet truth always stands stronger than loud denial." I turned to look at the children again. Ruby had set her doll upright between the towers, whispering something to it before it went to sleep. Finn glanced up at me, then quickly back down, as if ashamed of needing approval. Ollie hummed under his breath, lining up the blocks by color. "I don't want them to grow up thinking silence is safety," I murmured. Marion reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then teach them what safety really looks like. It's not about keeping secrets. It's about keeping dignity." The screen door creaked, and Ruby appeared in the doorway. "Grandma, can we go outside?" "After lunch," I said, smiling. She nodded and disappeared again. Marion stood and gathered her purse. "I'll text you the therapist's number. Her name's Diane. She's retired part-time now, takes families through referrals only. Tell her I sent you." I walked her to the porch. The sky was clearing, patches of blue breaking through the gray. Marion adjusted her scarf, her eyes soft but steady. "You've spent your life defending Paige's feelings," she said. "Maybe it's time to defend the truth instead." I watched her drive away the peaches still warm on the counter. Inside, laughter broke out, a small, clumsy sound as Finn knocked over the tower, and Ruby scolded him half-heartedly. I didn't know if Paige would ever forgive me for what I was about to do. But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't the same as permission, and love, real love, sometimes needed witnesses. The next afternoon, the house filled with the scent of butter and sugar. It was Ruby's idea to bake cookies, her quiet way of mending what words couldn't. Finn cracked eggs at the counter. Ruby leveled the sugar with careful hands, and Ollie, covered in flour, looked like a snowstorm had passed through him. "Careful, sweetheart," I said, brushing flour from his hair. "I'm making snow, Grandma," he giggled. The mixer hummed softly, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time since they'd arrived, the laughter sounded real, small, unguarded human. Then Ollie said, "Mom says Grandma smells like old books." The room froze. Ruby's head jerked up. "Ollie, don't say that." He frowned. "But she did. She said your house smells like paper and dust. I kept stirring the batter." "Old books aren't bad things, sweetheart. They smell like stories. Ollie tilted his head. She said it like it was bad. Ruby looked down. Maybe she forgot what home smells like. We baked in silence. When the cookies came out, warm, imperfect golden, the whole house softened. On the porch with milk and sunlight, Ollie grinned through crumbs. "Your house smells like cookies now, Grandma." Ruby smirked. It always did. Her teasing carried no edge this time. Finn leaned back, eyes on the trees. "Mom never bakes," he murmured. "Then maybe you'll bake for her someday," I said. He shrugged. "Maybe." Ruby looked out at the fading light. "Your house doesn't smell like old books," she said softly. "It smells like warm things, like people who stay." I poured milk into 3 glasses and raised mine. "To warm things," I said. Finn smiled. "And people who stay." It started with a drawer that stuck. I had gone into Paige's old room to find an extra blanket for Ruby. She'd insisted she didn't need one, but the mountain nights could turn cold fast. The dresser was still there, pale maple with worn handles, the same one I'd bought when she was 16. Most of her things were gone, years of moves, reinventions, and hurried goodbyes, but some ghosts refused to leave. When I pulled at the bottom drawer, it resisted, as if holding its breath. I tugged harder. Something gave way with a dull snap, and a folder wedged at the back slid free. It was thick yellowing at the edges, sealed with a rubber band. Paige's handwriting sprawled across the front in the same looping scrawl she'd used to label her school binders, house stuff. Keep. I carried it to the bed, sat down, and hesitated before peeling off the band. The smell of old paper hit me first, then the rustle of weight bills statements, legal envelopes all folded neatly, as if organization could hide the truth. The first pages were harmless enough utility statements, credit card summaries. Then came one with my address, Eleanor Marks, 28. Waverly Ridge Road, Asheville, followed by charges I didn't recognize. Designer boutiques, airline tickets, online courses with suspicious names like Success Streams and Dream Life Academy. My stomach tightened. There were at least 4 different credit cards listed, all in Paige's name, all registered to my address. Some with balances that could choke a teacher's pension. I flipped further through the pile, the paper whispering like confession. That's when I saw it, a lease agreement for a condominium in Miami. A sleek logo embossed at the top. The Atlantic Residences. Monthly rent, $4,200. Tenants Paige Carver and Eleanor Marks. My name, typed cleanly, and below it my signature. Except it wasn't mine. The pen stroke was close practiced even, but not right. She'd copied the loops of my E, the curve of my M. I had signed so many report cards, permission slips, and mortgage renewals that my handwriting was practically public. Paige had learned it by watching. I sat very still, the paper trembling between my fingers. The room felt smaller, the air thick. Outside, the wind stirred through the maples, their dry leaves scratching against the window like an impatient knock. I tried to think what would drive her to this. She hadn't spoken of Miami. Her last job had been somewhere in Atlanta, a marketing consultancy that sounded as vague as her travel plans. I turned the next page. More statements. Late fees. A printed email chain with her name and a man's C. Donovan. He thanked her for the investment promised returns after the next quarter. Underneath a note in her handwriting, "Don't tell Mom until it's stable." Stable. I closed the folder and pressed my palm to the cover. My reflection wavered in the mirror across the room, the same mirror Paige had once used to practice speeches, to try on dresses before her first job interview. The girl in that mirror had been fearless. Foolishly so. The woman who replaced her had learned to disguise fear with charm. I wasn't angry yet. Not in the way Paige had been angry at the world, loud, fast, burning out quick. Mine was a colder thing, a quiet tightening in the chest. Down the hall, I could hear the children laughing at something Finn said. Ruby's voice rose in protest. Ollie's giggle followed, then the thud of small feet running past the living room. They were alive, loud, unburdened for now. I looked back at the folder. Every lie Paige had built was sitting right there, bound in rubber and dust, and somewhere in Miami, a lease carried my forged name. Marion's words echoed in my head, document without drama. I took the folder to the kitchen, set it on the table beside my growing stack of notes. The lamplight hit the papers, making them look official already, like exhibits waiting for their day in truth's court. I opened my notebook, drew a line across a fresh page, and began copying details, dates, account numbers, signatures. Each stroke steadied me, turned disbelief into evidence. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the air filled with the slow, deliberate sound of a pen, an old teacher tracing her daughter's deception, one letter at a time. By Thursday morning, the folder on my kitchen table looked less like an accident and more like a plan. I'd slept little the night before. Each time I closed my eyes, Paige's forged signature floated behind my eyelids, smooth and confident, the way she used to fake permission slips in high school. Marion arrived early, carrying 2 cups of coffee and that air of quiet authority she never lost after retirement. "You look like you've been grading papers all night," she said. Something like that. I pushed the folder toward her. She scanned the pages, her brow tightening the deeper she read. When she looked up, her face was calm, but her voice was clipped. "You need to see a lawyer, Eleanor. Not because you want to charge her, but because you need to protect yourself before she drags you down with her." "I don't want to hurt her," I said. "You're not. You're drawing a boundary. That's different." By afternoon, Marion had arranged a meeting at a small community legal office on Biltmore Avenue. The kind of place that smelled faintly of dust and old coffee, where people came not to fight, but to survive. The lawyer was a middle-aged woman named Denise Harper, silver streaks in her dark hair, a tone both warm and firm. "Marion tells me your daughter may have used your name on financial documents," she said. "She did." My voice wavered, despite myself. "I just don't want to make things worse." Denise leaned back. "Then, let's make them safe instead." She showed me how to make certified copies of the documents, how to file an affidavit confirming the forgery without escalating it to criminal court. "If she defaults or the credit collectors come after you, this record will protect your name," she explained. "You're building a shield, not a sword." I liked that. A shield sounded dignified, honest. I left her office with a small stack of notarized papers tucked into a manila envelope and a strange sense of calm. The world outside seemed sharper, the autumn leaves brighter, the air cleaner, as if reality itself had straightened its spine. At home, the children were in the backyard, inventing some game with sticks and an overturned laundry basket. Finn was the captain, Ruby the navigator, and Ollie the tiny monster who lives below deck. Their laughter spilled through the open window like sunlight. For a moment I just stood there watching the envelope still clutched in my hand. All that proof of deception, all that paperweight, and here in front of me was proof of something entirely different. I set the envelope down beside my notebook and opened to a fresh page. October 12th. Afternoon light over the backyard. Ruby laughing so hard she fell on the grass. Finn pretending to be brave though he's terrified of bugs. Ollie collecting acorns in his pockets. They don't know I'm watching. They don't know they're saving me. I kept writing small things, what they said, how they looked at one another, how slowly the walls around them seemed to fall. It wasn't just a journal anymore. It was evidence too, but of something worth keeping, the rebuilding of trust, the proof that love wasn't gone, just hidden under layers of hurt. Later, when the kids came in, Ruby peeked at the open notebook. "What are you writing?" "Grandma, just notes," I said. "Good things I don't want to forget." "Like what?" Like this moment, I said. She smiled shyly and handed me one of the cookies from the tin we'd made earlier in the week, slightly burnt on the edges, but sweet enough. After they went to bed, I sat at the table again. The legal papers were neatly stacked beside my notebook, two kinds of proof side by side. One born from betrayal, the other from small kindnesses slowly taking root. I didn't know which would matter more in the end. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't writing to defend myself. I was writing to remember why I still believed people, even broken ones, could change. The community center sat quietly behind an old bakery, its yellow paint faded by sun and time. Inside, the air smelled of peppermint tea and safety. The children were quiet when we arrived, Ruby twisting her bracelet, Finn pulling at his hoodie strings, and Ollie clutching his dinosaur like a secret. Diane, the therapist Marion had recommended, met us with a kind smile. "Come in," she said softly. "Shoes off if you like." "We'll sit together." In the small room lined with picture books and toys, the children settled on a rug. I stayed near the window watching the sunlight stripe the floor. So Diane began, gently, "Your grandmother tells me your mom's been away. How's that felt?" Finn shrugged. "It's fine. Grandma's nice." "Nice is good," Diane said. "But how does it feel?" He hesitated. "It's quieter here. No yelling, no phones." Ruby's voice cracked the silence. "It's quiet, but not happy quiet. At home it's loud but fake. Mom says we're perfect, but I don't think perfect people cry in their cars." The room held its breath. Diane only nodded. "You can tell the truth here." Ruby's chin trembled. "If we tell the truth, Mom will get mad. Then we'll keep it safe," Diane said softly. Finn rubbed his eyes. "She forgets I'm even there sometimes. I just want her to look at me." My heart ached, but I stayed still. Then Ollie whispered, "Mom says Grandma's old, but Grandma listens." Ruby laughed weakly. "She's right." Even Diane smiled. Old ears hear more than most. By the time we left, something fragile had shifted. The kids walked lighter. Ruby hummed in the car. At home, I poured tea and wrote in my journal, "Healing doesn't shout. It whispers when someone finally listens." The morning began with the scent of cinnamon and quiet. Ruby was reading on the couch. Finn building something elaborate with blocks, and Ollie humming to himself as he lined up toy cars along the windowsill. For a moment, the house felt like what it should have always been, peaceful, unhurried, alive. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Paige. "Paige trip extended another week." "You're fine with that, right?" The words glowed on the screen, brisk and casual, like a request to water her plants. My hand stayed still over the phone for a long time before I typed back, "Eleanor, take your time." I hit send and set the phone down beside the teapot. The message felt both merciful and final. Through the window, I could see the mail truck pulling up. I stepped outside to collect the bundle of envelopes before the children noticed. Bills, a flyer, and one thick packet addressed to Paige Carver, CEO Eleanor Marks. Miami postmark. I didn't have to open it to know what was inside, more proof of what Marion and Denise had gently warned me to expect. Still, I carried it to the kitchen slit, the top carefully, and pulled the papers free. Credit statements. Travel charges. A receipt from the Atlantic residences dated just 3 days earlier. Room service spa treatments. Poolside dining for two. For two. The world didn't spin exactly, it just tilted. The edges of the page shimmered as if the ink itself were ashamed to be caught. I poured a cup of tea, steadying my hand, and let the paper rest on the table beside the others in my growing pile. One more piece in the quiet collection of things Paige didn't mean to confess. Her business trip, it seemed, had less to do with clients and more to do with escape, something she'd perfected since she was a teenager. Only now, the stakes weren't just broken curfews or missed rent payments. They were names on leases, Signatures forged children, waiting for promises that never quite arrived. Ruby wandered into the kitchen, brushing crumbs from her shirt. "Grandma? Can we go to the park later?" "Of course," I said. She noticed the open envelope. "Is that from Mom?" "Yes," I said, after a pause. "She sent mail by accident." Ruby frowned. "She forgets things a lot lately." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a kind of cautious observation, the way children say truth before they learn to hide it. After she left, I picked up my notebook again. Each entry was a kind of anchor evidence, not only of Paige's deceit, but also of everything the children were reclaiming in her absence. October 17th. Finn helped Ollie with his shoes without being asked. Ruby laughed today, not politely, but freely. She's starting to sound like herself. I closed the notebook and took a slow breath. My anger had thinned into something quieter resolve, maybe. I no longer needed to shout to be heard. In the afternoon, Marion stopped by with fresh bread and her usual blend of empathy and sharp perception. "Any news?" she asked. I handed her the printouts from the Miami envelope. She skimmed them, jaw tightening slightly. "That's not a work trip," she said. "I know." "She's not just lying to you, Eleanor. She's using you as her alibi." "I know that too." Marion sat across from me, her expression softening. "You're handling this with more grace than I would." "I've spent my life loving her," I said quietly. "That doesn't mean I have to love her mistakes." She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "Then you're already doing better than most." After she left, the house returned to its evening rhythm. The children played a board game in the living room, Ollie's laughter bubbling through the hall. I folded the new documents into a separate folder, labeled, dated, and sealed. I wasn't collecting them out of vengeance anymore. I was building clarity, one page at a time. Before bedtime, Ruby handed me her drawing a picture of our house with the three of them standing outside under a crooked sun. "This is for Mom," she said. "So she remembers what it looks like here." I took it carefully, tracing the uneven lines of the little blue house and the word home written across the roof in bright marker. When the house finally went quiet, I placed the drawing on top of the Miami papers. The contrast made me ache, one a symbol of truth, the other of everything lost to its absence. My phone buzzed again. Paige had sent a photo, her smiling beside a palm tree cocktail. In hand, captioned, "Hard work has its rewards." I stared at it for a long time before turning the screen face down on the table. She didn't realize it yet, but she'd already sent me everything I needed to see. Paige's car pulled into the driveway just after noon on a Wednesday. The sound of tires on gravel made the children rush to the window. For weeks they had spoken of her with careful distance, never anger, never longing. Just a quiet uncertainty that filled the space between her name and their silence. Now, as the engine shut off and the door slammed, I could feel that silence tremble. She came in with her sunglasses still on, dragging an expensive suitcase that looked more like a trophy than luggage. The scent of perfume trailed her through the hallway, sharp, foreign, too bright for this small mountain house. "Well," she said, exhaling, like she'd just crossed a finish line, "that trip was longer than planned." Ruby stood near the door, hugging her arms. Finn mumbled something that sounded like, "Hi." Only Ollie ran forward, stopping halfway, unsure whether to leap into her arms or not. Paige hesitated, then crouched down, offering a quick hug before standing again. "What happened here?" she asked, scanning the house as if she were an inspector. "It smells like cinnamon, and there are drawings everywhere." "They made those," I said gently. "They've been keeping busy." "Busy?" Paige gave a tight smile. "They're not supposed to have screen time limits, Mom." "I told you that." "And Ruby's hair. Did you let her cut it herself?" Ruby's shoulders stiffened. "I wanted it shorter." Paige sighed. "It looks uneven." She turned to Finn. "And you, why are you wearing that old sweater? You look like you're about to go hiking with Grandma." He said nothing. The tension gathered like static. Paige dropped her purse on the counter and finally looked at me. "You've changed their routines, haven't you?" "Some of them," I said. "They needed structure and time to be children." She rolled her eyes. "They had structure. You just don't understand what modern parenting looks like." "Maybe," I said quietly. "Or maybe I understand it too well." Her jaw tightened. "Don't start, Mom. I'm exhausted. I just want things back the way they were." The way they were. That phrase sat between us like a closed door. Ruby cleared her throat. "Can we go outside?" "Yes," I said. Before Paige could answer, the children slipped out to the porch, their footsteps quick and light with relief. When the door shut, the house felt suddenly larger, emptier. Paige crossed her arms. "They're acting strange. What did you tell them?" "Nothing they didn't already know," I said. She narrowed her eyes. "Meaning I reached for the manila folder on the counter, the one that had waited there for this moment. I placed it in front of her, calm, deliberate. What's this something you left behind?" She flipped through the first few pages, bank statements, credit notices, the Miami lease. The color drained from her face. Her voice sharpened. "You went through my things. You forged my signature," I said softly. "That gave me the right to know what I'd supposedly signed." "That's ridiculous," she snapped, the pitch of her voice climbing. "I didn't forge anything. There must be some mistake. Maybe the leasing office messed up." I watched her, how quickly denial turned to indignation. "They didn't mess up," I said. "Your handwriting did." She slammed the folder shut. "You think I'd do that to you? My own mother?" I don't think I said evenly. "I know. I've spent the last 2 weeks collecting proof." She laughed, once short and bitter. "You've always needed control. You can't stand that I have my own life, so you dig until you find something to hold over me." "This isn't about control," I said. "It's about consequences. Ones you've ignored too long." Her eyes flashed. "You don't know what I've been dealing with. The stress, the expectations." She stopped shaking her head as if the words were choking her. "Do you have any idea what it's like to raise 3 kids and work full-time? To try to keep everything from falling apart?" I didn't raise my voice. "I raised you while working full-time. And I didn't use anyone's name but my own." That landed. For a moment her face softened, like she might finally let the truth touch her. Then it hardened again. "I'm calling Daniel," she said abruptly, reaching for her phone. "He'll sort this out." Her husband, always the neutral diplomat, always busy, always just a phone call away when things got too real. She stepped onto the porch, pacing, her voice low but urgent. I could hear fragments. "Mistake Mom's overreacting. I didn't do anything wrong." Through the window, I saw Ruby standing near the steps, her expression unreadable. Finn and Ollie sat beside her, quiet and watchful. None of them ran to their mother. When Paige finally hung up and came back inside, her eyes were red, though she tried to look composed. "He says we'll figure it out," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "We just need time." "Take all the time you need," I said. She flinched slightly at the echo of her own message from Miami. The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the clock ticking from down the hall, the same one she'd once said made the house feel too old. Now it sounded like something steady, something honest. Paige brushed past me, muttering that she needed air. The door closed behind her with a sharp click. Outside, the children stayed still on the porch as she walked by, phone clutched like a lifeline. The late afternoon light caught her face, revealing how tired she truly was beneath the gloss. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the folder still open. The truth spread out like clean linen. No yelling, no accusations, just the sound of something fragile finally giving way. The next morning, the air was crisp and sharp, the kind of quiet that comes before something important. I had asked Marion and Denise, the lawyer, to come by. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was the only way to stop everything from unraveling completely. Paige arrived just after 10, her hair tied back too tightly, her smile too bright. She wore sunglasses again, though the porch was shaded. "So this is how it's going to be," she said, her voice already brittle. "An intervention. How dramatic, Mom." Marion stood beside the railing arms, folded, the steady presence she'd always been. Denise Harper sat at the small porch table, a folder in her lap, her manner calm but deliberate. "We're not here to accuse you," Paige Denise said evenly. "We're here to clarify what needs to happen next." Paige's eyes narrowed. "I don't need a lawyer, especially one that isn't mine." "She's not here against you," I said quietly. "She's here to make sure we don't lose what's left of this family." That softened her, if only for a second. She glanced toward the door where the children were watching from inside, faces half hidden behind the curtain. "Can we at least talk privately?" "We can," I said, "but not secretly. Those days are done." Paige exhaled, sinking into a chair. Her hands trembled slightly as she took off her sunglasses. Beneath them, her eyes were red-rimmed, tired. "Fine. Say whatever you need to say." I set the folder between us, the same one that had broken the silence last time. "These papers," I said, "will stay with Denise for now. They prove what you did, but they also protect you from making it worse. I don't want this to go to court. I want you to get help." Her mouth opened ready with the usual arguments, stress, misunderstanding, good intentions. But the words seemed to catch. "You think I'm some kind of criminal," she said softly. "I think you're drowning," I said. "And you've been pulling the rest of us under with you." Marion shifted her tone, steady but kind. "You've built your life on pressure, Paige. Pretending it's success doesn't make it safer. You need to slow down before it breaks you." Paige laughed, though it sounded hollow. "You make it sound so simple. You have no idea what I'm juggling." "Then let us help you put some of it down," I said. "You'll start therapy. You'll pay back the debts that carry my name. And for now, the children will stay here at least part-time until you can prove things are stable again." Her head snapped up. "You can't take my kids." "I'm not taking them," I said gently. "I'm giving them space to breathe. And you space to heal." Her lips tightened. "You can't just decide that." "I haven't decided it alone," I said, nodding toward Denise. "There are laws that protect everyone involved, including you. This isn't punishment, Paige. It's structure." The word hung in the air like a memory. She had once despised structure, bedtimes, chores, curfews, but now it was the one thing she no longer knew how to live without. She stood abruptly, pacing across the porch. "You're trying to make me look unfit to my own children. They see everything already," Marion said softly. Paige turned toward the window, then perhaps expecting comfort. But Ruby was standing there, her small hand pressed to the glass. When Paige met her daughter's gaze, something inside her seemed to falter. Ruby opened the door and stepped out slowly. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "we like it here." The sentence landed with the quiet power of truth. Paige froze her expression, flickering hurt, disbelief, something close to shame. Ruby looked up at her again. "Grandma listens. We sleep better. We don't have to pretend." Paige's jaw worked, but no words came. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of leaves overhead. Then she sank back into the chair. Her eyes wet her breath, uneven. "I didn't mean to make you pretend," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but now we stop pretending, all of us." The wind moved through the porch, lifting the edge of the papers on the table. Paige reached out, steadied them with her hand, and for once didn't look away. In that stillness, I saw the woman. She might still become the one who could face herself without breaking the mirror. 3 weeks passed before Paige returned to the porch, this time without sunglasses, without performance. The autumn air had cooled. The maples were nearly bare. She sat across from me with a pen in her hand. Eyes steady on the page, Denise had brought a voluntary agreement, not a verdict. Her voice trembled as she read each line aloud. Repayment plan? Therapy schedule. Visitation under supervision for 6 months. Words that once would have felt like punishment now sounded like structure, like something solid she could finally hold. When she reached the end, she hesitated. "You really think I can fix this? I think you can start," I said. She signed her name, Paige Marks Carver, and set the pen down. The sound of it clicking against the wood felt heavier than any gavel. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat in the quiet, two women who had finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were, mother and daughter flawed, but still tethered by the same thin, stubborn thread. Later that night, after the children were asleep, I found a folded note on my pillow in Ruby's careful handwriting. "Grandma, thanks for teaching us what home means. We'll take care of it too." The words blurred slightly as I read them, but not from sadness. For the first time in years, the house felt still in the right way. Not empty, not tense, just resting. Outside, a single leaf drifted across the porch, landing on the table where Paige's signature still glistened faintly in the lamplight. I didn't move it. Some things I'd learned need to settle before they can stay. By summer, the house had found its rhythm again. Morning light poured through the kitchen windows, spilling across the same wooden table that had once held silence, anger, and tears. Now it held laughter, paintbrushes, and plates of sliced peaches. On Thursdays, the neighborhood children came for art lessons. Their chatter filled the air as they dipped brushes into jars of color, creating suns, rivers, and dreams too wide for paper. Ruby helped Ollie cut fruit for the snacks, her hands steady, her voice gentle. Paige began visiting on Sundays. She came without excuses, sitting quietly at the edge of conversations, learning to listen instead of lead. Sometimes she brought flowers from the market. Sometimes nothing at all but presents. It was enough. After dinner one evening, as the cicadas hummed outside and the air shimmered with heat, Paige reached for a dish towel to help dry the plates. Our hands brushed. She looked up uncertain, but I only smiled and kept working beside her. At the table behind us, Ruby was laughing real full laughter, and Ollie's juice glass tilted dangerously close to spilling. No one rushed to stop it. The house at last could afford a little mess,